Hi, we're here today with our friend Litsa Williams, and we're going to be talking about the basics of grief. If you are ready for this conversation, feel free to jump right in, and if it's maybe a little triggering or you're not quite ready, we're going to be here whenever the time is right. So we've talked about that kind of the sky is the limit. There's so many things that you can do, but are there some things that are more effective than others? And what would you say are the most effective things that people can do to navigate their grief experience?
Yeah, so I think this is a tricky one because, again, it's so personal to all of us. But I think one of the things that we always want to let people start to think about is just, what do I want my values kind of to look like in this world after loss? And I know that can sound really vague, like what are our values? But our values are often these very grounding things that we held with us from our family or from our friends, whoever, how we've developed them over time. And those are things that in our lives we want to stay true to and stay consistent with over time. And the reason values are important, or thinking about values, is sometimes those are things that can let us know if we're still moving in the right direction or if we've started to move on a track where maybe we need some additional support because we're moving away from some of our values. So if, for me, community and friendship and family are really important values for me, and I realize maybe it's been 6, 9, 12, 18 months since my loss, and I'm really isolated. I'm really still not answering the phone calls from my friends. I'm avoiding family events because I feel like it's going to be too emotional. That helps me to see, wow, this grief has really pulled me away from values that were important to me. And this might be a place where I need to get a little bit of support. But that we use those values as a little bit of a litmus test can be really, really important, because it can help us see, no matter what our grief style, no matter what the loss was, no matter all those different things, how is our day-to-day rebuilding after loss? How is it going? Are we living as the people who we want to be in that life after loss? The other thing that I think we really want to emphasize, even if you're an introvert, even if you really like solitude, is finding ways to just stay connected with people. That is one thing that research across the board shows us helps in grief, and that it helps in trauma. Grief is fundamentally an attachment loss, and we as human beings, we know we're just wired for attachment. We're wired to be connected to other people. We know that by reconnecting with people, maybe not in month 1, maybe not in month 2, it's okay if you cocoon a little bit in those early days of grief, but to eventually start to reach out to those connections again and seek those attachments, even if it's just the few good friends, even if it's a small group, but you don't have to go back to, talking to everybody right away. We know that that's something that the research really shows helps us so much in grief.
What can those people do to support someone that's experiencing grief?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that we can say definitely make a big difference. And then there are other things where we always want to remind people that the best thing you can do is communicate with the person who's grieving. We find that sometimes people come to our website and they're looking for like a checklist of like, what do I say? What do I do? And we know that part of knowing what to say and what to do means knowing that person who you're there to support and trusting that you do know that person and you can have a conversation with them and be open about the fact that maybe you're not sure. And so sometimes when we label that anxiety, it actually really helps us to feel better. So I think if I know that you've gone through something and I'm struggling to know how to support you, to be able to say, John, I really want to be here for you and I'm really just not sure right now. Some of the things I've been thinking is that I could do X, Y, or Z, whatever things maybe you've been thinking about. And then be able to say, but I know that might not be what you need. If you think there's other things that would be more helpful, can you tell me what those are? But then make sure you leave plenty of room for it to be easy for them to be like, no, everybody's bringing me so much food. I don't need any more. I don't need anybody to get my kids. What actually would help is this. So that's one place that we always encourage people to start. The other thing we always encourage people to do is be really, really cautious of rushing people or of judging them in their grief in some way. So really knowing and being sensitive to the fact that this person grieving, it's going to be in their own time, in their own pace, and it's going to be in their own way. And you might not understand all of that. The big thing, making sure you're there over the long term. Everybody is really good in the short term, right? Of showing up with the meal train and doing those things early on. And oftentimes in grief, what we know is that it is after those first few months that you look around and you think, oh my gosh, everybody forgot. Everybody's life has gone back to normal. And I'm still here struggling. I'm still here in need of support. Maybe now is when I feel like I could really use somebody to cook me dinner, and everybody has disappeared. The thing that can be most important to remember is that what we often need from someone is for them to just be present with our pain. Not to look for the silver lining, not to look for the magic words that are going to fix it. Nothing's going to fix it. Like, it just feels bad. But when we feel that coming from another person, I think it can be helpful to remember that it's coming from that place that they don't want to see us suffering, and it's misguided and it's not what we need. But it's coming from that well-intentioned place that they're trying to alleviate some of our suffering. It can be a moment to be able to say, I appreciate so much. I know that you're saying that to try and make me feel better. But at this moment, I just need you to sit here with me in all the ugly, messy pain. I don't need you to try to make me feel better. And I think then sometimes it gives the other person a cue to say, okay, I don't need to find the magic words. I just need to be here.
Some of the people that will be watching this video maybe didn't experience the actual loss themselves. Again, they're kind of adjacent to that grief. But I love it because they're going to be more grief literate. They're going to be able to help and support those people that are grieving. For those individuals, they might feel that the person that experienced the loss needs a little bit more help on their journey. What advice would you have for those individuals?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one because I think oftentimes we as a society have been given false ideas about what grief looks like. So sometimes we're seeing someone grieving and they mention to us that they're making their son's favorite pie for his birthday coming up. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, she's stuck. Why is she doing that? That feels weird. And really it's just that haven't been given this template to understand that grief is ongoing and that these continued connections, these bonds we have to our loved one, the pain that we're going to feel on all sorts of different days, that's going to be with us forever. And so sometimes what we're seeing is just grief. And we're thinking, oh no, they need additional support. Sometimes they really do need additional support, right? And I think that is sometimes where maybe we see someone where we do feel like the life that they're living does feel like maybe it isn't connected with those values that we know were important to them. We see that church used to be at the center of her life and she hasn't been able to even make it out to a service in months. Those things where we're starting to see that real struggling where maybe somebody is not connected with other people or isolating. That's a place where I think we can delicately have conversations with people in our lives. And it's important to be able to have a conversation to say, it looks like things are still really hard and I want to be able to help you to find whatever you need now. And maybe that is some of that traditional counseling support group stuff. Maybe it's something else, right? When we start to open those conversations, we might start to learn that somebody is really overwhelmed by logistical and practical things, and that's actually what is then causing them to feel like they can't get back to volunteering or they can't get back to book club is because they're so overwhelmed by doing their taxes for themselves for the first time or maintaining a house that feels overwhelming to take care of on their own. So feeling confident to open up those conversations in a delicate way, not assume that you know what the answer is.
As it relates to the individual, so putting ourselves in the shoes of the bereaved, the person that had that loss, what things should they be looking for when there's an indicator that they maybe need a little bit more help? What signs or signals should they be looking at?
Sure. So I think the first one that we always want to say that's the most important is, of course, if anyone is ever having any thoughts about hurting themselves or about just not wanting to be here anymore. And I think that is something where oftentimes people will think that if I was having thoughts of self-harm or of suicide, that I would know, and they would be very obvious and specific. But sometimes it's not the most extreme end of the spectrum. Sometimes it's just you find yourself laying in bed and thinking like, man, it would maybe just be easier if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning. And that when we find ourselves having those sorts of thoughts, that can be an important place to say, you know what, maybe I should talk to someone, because even if they're not a big problem right now, that could be moving in a direction that's a little bit of a problem. So we always want to start with that one. And wonderfully in the US now, you can call 988 if you're ever having any thoughts, and they'll connect you with somebody in your area to be able to get some support. So that's always the first one. But if it's something just in terms of regular grief support and not being sure, do I need it or do I not need it? One of the things we always tell people is there is no minimum threshold that you need to meet. If you are thinking that talking to somebody might be helpful, do it. Like, there's no reason not to. One of the things that I would say is using that litmus test of my day-to-day life, my values. How connected or disconnected am I feeling from living a life that's connected with my values? The other piece that I would use is how kind am I being to myself in my grief? If you're finding yourself waking up every day and thinking, oh my gosh, I am so useless that I can't get my life back in order. I can't believe that I still haven't managed to be able to go back to work. If you find yourself kind of beating yourself up all of the time for how your grief is unfolding, that is absolutely a time to connect with other people, whether that's other grievers in a support group or whether that's a counselor who can help to talk to you about that. Our perception of our own grief, it matters a lot. And if we start to find that grief is something that we're beating ourselves up about, we don't want to sit at home and do that alone. That is never going to take us into good places. And that's always a point where we want to start to try to steer things back in that direction of connection to other people. I think one thing that people sometimes do is they start to feel a little bit of guilt about feeling better. And so sometimes people hesitate to get support because there's part of them that feels like, I should feel like this forever. If I'm in this world where the person who died isn't here, if I start to have more good days than bad days, if I start to live my life again and feel reconnected with my values and doing those things, that's me forgetting them. And I cannot stress to people enough that that's absolutely not what's happening. Our pain is not our connection to the person who died. And often in early grief, that's what we feel. We feel like our pain is our connection. So if my pain starts to go away, my connection is going away. But the reality is our connection lives in so many other things. Our connection is in all of our memories and all the ways that we live in the world through the things that they taught us and going to the places that we know that they always wanted to see or that we used to visit with them, all of these other things. And really, when our pain starts to alleviate, what many people find is that their connection grows.